Okay, so I'm in the middle of production for two huge videos about horror animation, which are taking a lot more time than I originally anticipated. They're gonna be about 2 hours per video, and in the meantime, I wanted to kind of create shorter videos just to test out a couple of new production methods and to keep the channel live. The upcoming videos will be a little shorter on research, much more about like my personal interpretation, my personal vibes about them, and yeah. So I hope that's something you're up for. If not, I'll probably get back to you in about I don't know 6 months or something. And yeah. So here's the first one. So I want to start off this video with a bit of a silly question. Have you ever wanted to be an office cryptid? In the modern workplace, most of the work happens in front of your screen. So that doesn't leave a lot of options to be weird in a way that's meaningful and undisruptive enough that you won't get fired. So mostly we'll narrow this choice down to just being on your computer. So there's at least a couple of immediate socially unacceptable things that might spring to mind. You could be watching some 80s OVAs on your computer in the lunch break, or you could be listening to the most brutal slam death metal breaks after the year 2014, but I'd say both of these are disqualifying because you're categorizable. You're just a type of guy. If you're watching the 80s OVAs, you're just an anime nerd. If you're listening to the most brutal slam death metal breaks, you're just a metalhead. I'd say to be an office cryptid, you have to be uncategorizable. In this way, the office cryptid works as a sort of bin outside of a type of guy. It's kind of like amorality in the scale of ethics. It's outside of the system. I'd suggest that to be an office cryptid, you have to perform a thing that doesn't fall into any sort of category. You can't be recognizable. So I'd suggest pop in Michael Snow's 2002 installation, Solar Breath, Northern Caryatids. So what makes this a sort of cryptid activity? Well, as you can see, Solar Breath is pretty mundane. It's just a curtain being affected by a draft. It gets sucked in, and then it gets released. Then it's blown a little open, and then it gets sucked in. There's nothing dramatic going on. You're quite literally watching a draft happening. Probably everyone's seen this in their life at some point. But that alone is weird, right? Why would you ever watch this static picture of a curtain just flapping around for 5 minutes? Well, there are a couple of things you can glean from this. Personally, the first time I saw Solar Breath, I just thought it was really relaxing. And that's good enough, right? Well, maybe for the first couple of times, but I've seen Solar Breath like 7 times now. And I think the presence of Michael Snow, who's a very well-known structuralist filmmaker, implies that there's something more going on too. So let's riff on it, and start from square one, which naturally is a mile away, but we'll bridge that gap. So for the last year, I've been really into slow cinema. I've been obsessively watching all the videos on YouTube about it, and I even got this fantastic book on the subject. But I think there's one video above all that really speaks to my engagement with it. On the superb video, Slow Cinema, Zai, Lynch, etc., Robin D talks about how the slowness of slow cinema leads him to engage with the screen in a very different way than normal. Instead of seeing movies as a constant stream of information carried on by editing, Robin argues that the stillness of slow cinema makes us engage with the screen in a way that's more akin to watching a painting than a traditional movie. With this sort of painterly point of view, we can start to latch on to small details on the screen. So let's take this as a critical exercise and see what sort of details come out if we apply this thought to solar breath. Well, just visually speaking, you can catch some glimpses of the yard as the wind blows the curtain open. You can see some beautiful Newfoundlandsian nature, a solar panel on the table. You can think about how the presence of the window makes the shot basically a frame within a frame. Or you could focus on the audio. The curtain flapping has a very satisfying quality to it, but if you really perk up your ears, there's a lot of domestic details you can pick up too. There's creak there, a little coughing, some slight chatter, glass ringing. If you focus on the movement on the screen, you can see that there's a little rhythm going on. It's not regular or anything, but there is a sort of calmness to the way the curtain is being sucked in, released, blown open, released. It does feel like a breath. In her piece about solar breath for Art Canada Institute, Martha Langford goes into great detail about specific parts of the movie and how they were constructed. She mentions how Michael Snow himself built the windowsill, her wife built the curtains, and even how the specific time of day, 1 hour before sunset, leads to the atmospheric composition that leads to this draft. She also evokes the Duchampian ready-made, how an artist can be taken by surprise by a natural phenomenon and how that can be transmuted into art by the hand of the artist. Generally, I'm kind of skeptical about this level of artist's involvement in the interpretation, especially when the piece isn't directly autobiographical. But in a sense, something like Solar Breath very much depends on the artist being there and having some sort of intention rather than just presenting life as it is. Presenting life as it is. Now that's an interesting thought, isn't it? Because we as humans have a limited attention span, and because it's too much to try to process everything we see, it's often very easy to just blank something out when it's not screaming at you, you know? And something like a draft pulling a curtain back and forth isn't really that interesting, right? But I think that's where we need artists. There are places to sort of dislodge our understanding of normalcy and make us introspect about things that are just happening. So when we stop to think about it, what does a draft even mean? Well, I guess there are as many interpretations as there are people around, but here's mine. I think a draft is a sort of silent rebellion. It happens because of a complex set of circumstances, and it's certainly not something that's purposeful, but also it's not something that's so disruptive it has to be stopped. And I think this is as good a time as any to loop back to the office cryptid question. As I stated earlier, office cryptid is a person who's uncategorizable, but also something that's not disruptive, at least to the point of getting fired. So in a way, there's this sort of weird symmetry between these two subjects. And I think that's the reason why you'd ever want to be an office cryptid. You're trying to find ways to dislodge the understanding of the situation and see how that makes you feel. Like, if you pause to think of the premise of this video, it's basically a paradox. What I'm saying is, seeing something very mundane centered in a video is weird. But why is that weird exactly? What is it about this draft that is cryptid in any sort of way? Well, I think it's that requirement, or polite ask, to introspect about it. A couple of years ago, when I was coming back home from Helsinki Biennale, I had this wonderful conversation with my partner's mom. She managed to put to words a lot of the thoughts I've been trying to crystallize over the years when it comes to art and art criticism. She said to me that she thinks of art as a sort of relationship where you find something to connect to. It could be how it looks, how it feels, how it sounds. It could be the message within it, but she specifically pointed out that it could be a question. And if that question is something that will drive you forward, something you find compelling, that's a sign of good art. And if the connection never gets made, well, it wasn't good art for you. If I think about solar breath in this way, I start to fill in the blanks. What are the things that you're not supposed to engage with, something you're expected to look over? And to me, that stuff is, of course, something like the monopoly of violence, ecological destruction, the way disabled people are treated in our society. But, you can project whatever you want into it. Except if you're a Nazi. Fuck everything you stand for. But to find an answer that fits that question, that's something you'll have to find for yourself. I actually gotta go. I have a couple of work meetings I need to attend to. But yeah, until next time.